Marcus Rodriguez walked slowly through Denver International Airport with his black duffel bag hanging over his right shoulder. His left leg moved a bit stiff from the metal pieces still inside it from that day in Afghanistan 2 years ago. He did not like to think about that day much, but the doctors at the VA hospital had been asking him lots of questions about it. For the past 3 days, the airport was busy with people running everywhere to catch their flights. Marcus kept his head down and tried not to look at anyone. He wore simple blue jeans and a plain gray jacket with a small pin on it that he had forgotten to take off. The pin was tiny and most people would not notice it, but it meant everything to him. He found his gate and sat down in one of the hard plastic chairs. His ticket said Seat 3A, which was in first class, but he felt weird about it. A businessman in an expensive suit had bought the upgrade for him after they talked in the VA hospital waiting room. The man had thanked Marcus for his service and said it was the least he could do. Marcus tried to say no, but the man would not listen. Marcus pulled out his phone and looked at the picture of his sister, Maria, and her 2 kids. He was going to see them in Atlanta, where Maria worked as a teacher. She had been asking him to visit for months, but he kept making excuses. The truth was he did not like being around people much since he came back from the war. Too many questions, and too many people trying to thank him for things he wished he could forget. The boarding announcement came over the speaker, and Marcus got in line with the other first-class passengers. He felt out of place with these people in their nice clothes and expensive bags. A flight attendant with bright red lipstick smiled at him and checked his ticket. She seemed surprised to see him but said nothing and pointed toward the front of the plane. Marcus found his seat and put his bag in the overhead bin. The seat was big and comfortable with lots of space for his legs. He sat down and tried to make himself small. A woman across the aisle was talking loudly on her phone about some business deal. A man behind him was complaining about the Wi-Fi not working yet. More passengers kept coming on the plane, and Marcus watched them walk by. He saw families with little kids and old couples holding hands and business people typing on their laptops. Everyone seemed to know where they belonged except him. After about 10 minutes, a well-dressed couple walked up to his row. The woman had blonde hair and wore a lot of jewelry. The man had gray hair and an expensive watch. They both looked angry about something. The woman was holding her phone and pointing at the screen. The woman called for a flight attendant, and when one came over, she started talking in a loud voice. She said there had been some mistake with their seats and that they were supposed to be sitting in first class. The flight attendant looked confused and asked to see their tickets. The couple showed their tickets, and the flight attendant explained that their seats were in row 15, which was in the main cabin. The woman's face got red and she started talking louder. She said she had paid extra money for first-class seats and that someone must have made an error. The man pointed at Marcus and said something about how there was obviously some mix-up because people like him did not belong in first class. The woman nodded and said she was sure Marcus was in their seats by mistake. She kept looking at his clothes and his old duffel bag like they were dirty. Marcus felt his face get hot, but he did not say anything. The flight attendant asked to see his ticket, and Marcus showed it to her. The ticket clearly said Seat 3A and had his name on it. The flight attendant told the couple that Marcus was in the right seat and they needed to go to their assigned seats, but the woman would not give up. She kept saying there had to be some mistake and asking why someone like Marcus would have a first-class ticket. She was not being quiet about it, and other passengers started looking over to see what was happening. Marcus could feel everyone staring at him. His chest started to feel tight the way it did sometimes when too many people were around. He thought about the crowds in the marketplace in Kandahar and the sound of the bomb and the screaming. He closed his eyes and tried to push the memory away. The flight attendant was trying to be polite but firm with the couple. She explained again that everyone was in their correct seats and asked them to please take their assigned seats so the plane could take off on time. The woman crossed her arms and said she was going to call the airline customer service. Marcus looked around and saw that many passengers were watching the argument. Some looked annoyed that the plane was being delayed. Others looked curious about what was happening. A few people were taking pictures with their phones. The woman turned to Marcus and asked him directly where he had gotten his ticket and if he was sure he was supposed to be in first class. Her voice was not mean, but it was clear she did not think he belonged there. Marcus felt smaller and smaller in his big comfortable seat. He thought about his sister, Maria, and how she always told him to stand up for himself. He thought about his fellow soldiers who had died in Afghanistan and how they would have handled this situation. But mostly he thought about how he just wanted to disappear and not cause any trouble for anyone. Marcus looked at the couple and then at all the people watching him. He could feel the small silver star pin on his jacket, but he did not want to explain what it meant or why he had earned it. He did not want to tell them about the day he had saved 14 people, including 3 children from the bombed marketplace. He did not want to talk about the metal in his leg or the nightmares he still had. Instead, Marcus stood up slowly and reached for his bag in the overhead bin. He looked at the flight attendant and said quietly that it was okay and he would move to another seat. The flight attendant started to protest, but Marcus shook his head and said he did not want any trouble. The woman smiled and thanked him like he had done her a big favor. The man patted Marcus on the shoulder in a way that was supposed to be friendly, but felt fake. Marcus picked up his bag and walked toward the back of the plane. Trying not to look at any of the passengers who were still watching him, he found an empty middle seat in row 23, between a large man who smelled like onions and a woman who was already asleep. Marcus put his bag under the seat in front of him and tried to fit his stiff leg into the small space. The seat was hard and narrow and nothing like the comfortable first-class seat he had just left. As the plane prepared for takeoff, Marcus stared out the small window and wondered if he had made the right choice. General Patricia Hayes sat in seat 2B wearing a simple black sweater and dark jeans. She had learned long ago that traveling in uniform brought too much attention when she just wanted to get from one place to another. After 30 years in the Air Force, she knew how to blend in with regular passengers when she needed to, but right now she was not thinking about blending in. She was watching the young man in row 3 and feeling her anger grow with each passing second. Patricia had seen the whole thing happen, and she did not like what she was seeing. The young man had carried himself in a way that Patricia recognized immediately. She had spent 3 decades around soldiers, and she knew one when she saw one. The way he walked with purpose despite his slight limp, and the way he kept his back straight even when he was sitting, told her everything she needed to know about his background. When the well-dressed couple had approached his row, Patricia had paid closer attention. She watched the woman point at the young soldier and complain about some mix-up with seats. Patricia could hear most of what was being said from just one row behind, and she did not like the tone in the woman's voice. But what really caught Patricia's attention was the small pin on the young man's jacket. From where she was sitting, she could see it clearly, and her breath caught in her throat. It was a silver star lapel pin. Patricia had presented enough of those medals to families of fallen heroes to recognize one from across a room. The silver star was not just any military decoration. It was the 3rd highest award for valor in combat. Patricia knew that whoever earned one had done something extraordinary under enemy fire. They had risked their own life to save others and shown courage that most people could never imagine. She watched as the young soldier quietly agreed to give up his first-class seat rather than cause trouble. Patricia saw the defeat in his shoulders as he gathered his small bag and walked toward the back of the plane. The couple took his seat like they had won some kind of prize, and the woman was actually smiling about it. Patricia felt sick to her stomach. In all her years of service, she had met thousands of brave men and women who had sacrificed for their country. Many of them came home changed by what they had seen and done. Many of them struggled to fit back into normal life after experiencing things that civilians could never understand. She knew that combat veterans often preferred to stay quiet about their service. They did not want attention or thanks because they carried guilt about friends who did not make it home. They felt uncomfortable being called heroes when they knew the real heroes were the ones who never came back. Patricia had seen this pattern many times before. Young soldiers who had done incredible things in war but came home and tried to disappear into normal life. They took jobs that were below their abilities and lived in small apartments and avoided crowds because being around too many people reminded them of dangerous situations overseas. The plane was getting ready for takeoff, but Patricia could not stop thinking about what she had just witnessed. She looked toward the back of the plane where the young soldier was now sitting squeezed into a middle seat between two other passengers. Even from her distance, she could see he was having trouble fitting his legs into the small space. Patricia knew about combat injuries. She had visited enough wounded warriors in hospitals to recognize when someone was dealing with physical pain. On top of everything else, the way the young man had walked told her his left leg was giving him problems, and now he was crammed into a tiny economy seat for what would probably be a long flight. The flight attendants were doing their safety demonstration. But Patricia was not paying attention. She was thinking about all the Silver Star citations she had read over the years. Each one told a story of incredible bravery in the face of overwhelming odds. Soldiers who had run toward gunfire to save wounded comrades, or civilians who had stayed behind to hold off enemy attacks while others escaped to safety. She wondered what this young man's story was. What had he done to earn that medal, and what price had he paid for his heroism? Patricia could see he was probably in his late 20s, which meant he had likely served in Afghanistan or Iraq. Both wars had produced many heroes, but also many wounded warriors who came home to fight different battles. The plane started moving away from the gate, and Patricia made a decision. She could not sit there and do nothing while a decorated combat veteran was treated with disrespect. It went against everything she believed in about honoring those who had served their country. Patricia had not reached the rank of 4-star general by being quiet when she saw injustice. She had spent her career fighting for what was right, even when it was not popular or easy. She had stood up for junior officers who were being mistreated and challenged policies that were unfair to service members and their families, but this was different. This was not about military protocol or chain of command. This was about basic human decency and respect for sacrifice. This was about a young man who had risked his life for strangers and was now being treated like he did not deserve common courtesy. Patricia looked around the first-class cabin and saw the couple who had taken the soldier's seat. They were already ordering drinks and talking loudly about their business. The woman was showing her husband something on her phone and laughing. Neither of them seemed to care about what they had just done. The plane was taxiing toward the runway. But Patricia knew they had not taken off yet. Flight crews always did final checks before takeoff, and there might still be time to fix this situation. She started thinking about her options and what she could do to make things right. Patricia had her military identification in her purse. As a 4-star general, she had authority that most people would respect even in civilian situations. She also knew that airline crews were usually very supportive of military members when they understood the situation. She thought about the young soldier sitting uncomfortably in the back of the plane. He had probably given up his seat because he did not want to cause trouble or draw attention to himself. He was probably hoping to just get through the flight quietly and reach his destination without any more problems, but Patricia knew that sometimes doing the right thing meant making trouble. Sometimes it meant standing up and speaking out even when it was uncomfortable. Sometimes it meant using your authority to protect someone who could not or would not protect themselves. The plane stopped moving, and Patricia heard the captain announce that they were next in line for takeoff. She knew she had to act now if she was going to do anything. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up, knowing that what happened next would either make things better or create an even bigger scene. Patricia walked toward the front of the plane, where she could see flight attendants preparing for takeoff. She had made her decision, and there was no turning back now. Patricia walked up to the flight attendant who was checking her papers before takeoff. The young woman looked surprised to see a passenger standing up when they were preparing to leave the gate. Patricia kept her voice quiet but firm when she spoke. She told the flight attendant that she needed to speak with the captain right away about an urgent matter. The flight attendant looked confused and asked if there was some kind of emergency. Patricia showed her military identification card and said it was a matter of military protocol that needed immediate attention. The flight attendant stared at the ID card and her eyes got wide when she saw the 4 stars and Patricia's rank. She had never seen a general on one of her flights before and was not sure what to do. She asked Patricia to wait a moment and walked quickly toward the cockpit. Patricia stood near the front of the plane, feeling the eyes of other first-class passengers on her. Some people were looking annoyed that takeoff was being delayed. Others seemed curious about what was happening. The well-dressed couple who had taken the soldier's seat were whispering to each other and pointing in her direction. After a few minutes, the cockpit door opened and Captain Jennifer Walsh came out. She was a woman in her 40s with short brown hair and captain's stripes on her uniform. She looked professional but confused about why a passenger wanted to speak with her before takeoff. Patricia introduced herself and showed her identification again. Captain Walsh's expression changed immediately when she realized she was talking to a 4-star general. She asked Patricia what the problem was and if there was some kind of security issue she needed to know about. Patricia explained what she had witnessed during boarding. She told the captain about the young soldier who had been forced to give up his first-class seat by passengers who had no right to ask him to move. She described how the man had quietly agreed to move than cause trouble even though his ticket was valid. Captain Walsh listened carefully and asked Patricia how she knew the young man was a soldier. Patricia pointed toward the back of the plane and explained about the silver star pin she had seen on his jacket. She told the captain what that medal meant and why it was so important. Patricia had to control her voice when she explained what the silver star represented. She told Captain Walsh that it was given only to soldiers who had shown extraordinary heroism in combat. She said that whoever wore that pin had risked their life to save others and had been willing to die for people they might not even know. The captain asked Patricia if she was certain about what she had seen. Patricia nodded and said she had spent 30 years in the military and had presented many of those medals to families of fallen heroes. She knew a silver star when she saw one, and she knew the kind of person who earned one. Captain Walsh looked toward the back of the plane where Marcus was sitting. She could not see him clearly from where they stood, but she trusted what the general was telling her. She had been flying for 20 years and had carried many military members on her flights. She knew they deserved better treatment than what Patricia was describing. Patricia continued explaining the situation. She told the captain that the young soldier was clearly dealing with injuries from his service. She had noticed his limp and the careful way he moved his left leg. Now he was crammed into a middle seat in economy, where he would be uncomfortable for the entire flight. The captain shook her head and said this was not acceptable. She told Patricia that the airline had policies about treating military members with respect and that what had happened was completely wrong. She asked Patricia what she thought should be done about the situation. Patricia had been thinking about this since she first stood up from her seat. She told the captain that the young soldier should be returned to his original first-class seat, where he belonged. The couple who had forced him to move should be the ones relocated to economy class, where their tickets actually placed them. Captain Walsh agreed, but said she was worried about causing a scene that might upset other passengers. Patricia understood her concern but explained that sometimes doing the right thing meant making people uncomfortable. She said that honoring those who had served their country was more important than avoiding difficult conversations. The captain thought about it for a moment and then nodded. She said she would make an announcement to the passengers explaining what needed to happen. She asked Patricia if she would be willing to personally ask the young soldier to return to first class since he might be more comfortable hearing it. From another military person, Patricia said she would be honored to speak with the young man. She had been hoping for the chance to meet him and learn more about his service. She wanted to make sure he understood that not everyone agreed with how he had been treated and that his sacrifice was appreciated. Captain Walsh told the flight attendants what was happening and asked them to prepare for some passenger movement before takeoff. The lead flight attendant said she remembered the situation from boarding and was glad something was being done about it. She said she had felt bad watching the young man give up his seat but had not known what to do. Patricia walked back toward her seat to get her purse, but stopped to look toward the back of the plane. She could see Marcus sitting between two other passengers looking uncomfortable and staring out the window. She wondered what he was thinking about and whether he was regretting his decision to give up his seat. She thought about all the young soldiers she had met over the years who carried invisible wounds from their service. Many of them struggled with feeling like they did not deserve recognition or special treatment. They often put themselves last and avoided situations where they might receive attention for their sacrifice. Patricia knew this was about more than airplane seats. This was about showing respect for someone who had given everything for his country and asked for nothing in return. This was about making sure he knew that his service mattered, and that there were people who would stand up for him when he would not stand up for himself. The captain was preparing to make her announcement, and Patricia was ready to walk to the back of the plane. She had made her decision, and she was going to see it through no matter what anyone else thought about it. Sometimes being a leader meant taking action, even when it was uncomfortable or unpopular. Patricia straightened her shoulders and prepared to do what she knew was right. The young soldier in seat 23B was about to learn that someone had been watching and someone cared enough to act. Captain Walsh picked up the microphone and cleared her throat before speaking to all the passengers on the plane. Her voice was serious and professional when she began making the announcement that would change everything for Marcus Rodriguez. She told everyone that there had been a serious mistake during boarding that needed to be corrected before they could take off. She explained that a decorated military hero had been improperly asked to give up his assigned seat and that this situation would be fixed immediately. She asked all passengers to remain calm while they sorted out the seating issue. The cabin became very quiet as people tried to understand what the captain was talking about. Some passengers looked around trying to figure out who she meant. Others seemed annoyed that takeoff was being delayed for what sounded like a seating problem. Marcus was sitting in his cramped middle seat trying to make his injured leg comfortable when he heard the announcement. At first he did not understand that the captain was talking about him. He thought maybe there was some other military person on the plane who was having problems with their seat. Patricia started walking slowly toward the back of the plane while the captain continued speaking. She could feel other passengers watching her as she moved down the aisle. Some people seemed curious about what was happening while others looked frustrated about the delay. The captain explained that the airline had strict policies about honoring the service of military members and that these policies had not been followed during boarding. She said that any passenger who had earned medals for valor in combat deserved the respect and courtesy that came with their sacrifice. Marcus felt his face getting hot as he began to realize the captain might be talking about him. He looked around and saw that some passengers were staring in his direction. The large man sitting next to him was looking at him with new interest, and the woman on his other side had woken up from her nap. Patricia reached row 23 and stopped next to Marcus's seat. She looked down at the young man who was clearly uncomfortable with all the attention he was receiving. She could see the silver star pin on his jacket more clearly now and felt even more certain that she was doing the right thing. She introduced herself quietly and asked if she could speak with him for a moment. Marcus looked up at this well-dressed woman who seemed to know something about him that he had not told anyone. He nodded but did not say anything because he was not sure what was happening. Patricia told Marcus that she had seen what happened during boarding and that it was not right. She explained that she was a general in the Air Force and that she recognized his silver star pin. She said that no one who had earned that medal should be treated with disrespect by anyone. Marcus stared at her in shock. He had tried so hard to avoid attention, and now a general was talking to him in front of a plane full of people. He started to say that it was okay and that he did not mind sitting in economy, but Patricia stopped him. She told Marcus that it was not okay and that his service and sacrifice mattered. She said that the couple who had asked him to move had no right to do that and that he deserved better treatment. She asked him to please return to his assigned seat in first class where he belonged. Other passengers were listening to the conversation and beginning to understand what had happened. Some people started whispering to each other about the situation. A few passengers took out their phones and started recording what was happening. Marcus felt overwhelmed by all the attention, but he could see that the general was serious about this. He had been taught to respect higher-ranking officers, and he could tell that Patricia was someone who was used to being obeyed. He slowly stood up and reached for his bag under the seat in front of him. Patricia helped him get his bag and then walked with him toward the front of the plane. As they moved down the aisle, some passengers started to clap. At first it was just one or two people, but then more passengers joined in. Soon most of the plane was applauding. Marcus felt his eyes getting watery as he walked toward first class, with the general beside him. He was not used to this kind of attention, and he did not know how to handle it. Part of him wanted to disappear, but another part of him felt something he had not felt in a long time when they reached the first class section. The well-dressed couple who had taken his seat looked shocked to see him returning. The woman started to protest, but Captain Walsh came out of the cockpit and explained that they needed to move to their assigned seats in the main cabin immediately. The man argued that they had paid for upgrades, but the captain told him that their tickets showed economy seats and that was where they belonged. She said that the young soldier had a valid first-class ticket and would be returning to his original seat. The couple gathered their things and walked toward the back of the plane, looking embarrassed and angry. Some passengers shook their heads as they passed, while others stared at them with disapproval. The woman tried to complain to a flight attendant, but was told that the matter was settled. Patricia helped Marcus put his bag in the overhead bin and watched as he settled into his original seat. She could see he was still overwhelmed by everything that had happened. She asked if she could sit in the empty seat next to him so they could talk during the flight. Marcus nodded and Patricia sat down beside him. She told him that she wanted to hear about his service and learn more about how he had earned his Silver Star. She said it would be an honor to listen to his story if he was willing to share it. The flight attendants finished getting everyone settled, and the captain announced that they were ready for takeoff. As the plane began moving toward the runway, Patricia looked at the young soldier sitting beside her and felt proud that she had been able to help him. She knew that what had happened was about more than airplane seats. It was about showing respect for sacrifice and making sure that heroes were treated with the dignity they deserved. It was about standing up for what was right even when it was uncomfortable. Marcus looked out the window as the plane prepared to take off and felt something change inside him. For the first time in a long time, he felt like maybe his service had meant something to someone other than himself. The plane was cruising at 30,000 feet when Patricia turned to Marcus and asked him about his time in Afghanistan. She spoke quietly so other passengers could not hear their conversation. Marcus was hesitant at first because he did not like talking about the war, but something about the general made him feel safe. He told her that he had been deployed to Kandahar province with his unit in 2022. They were working with local Afghan forces to help protect civilians in small villages near the Pakistani border. Marcus said it was dangerous work because the Taliban was still active in that area and attacks happened almost every day. Patricia listened carefully as Marcus described his deployment. She had been to Afghanistan many times during her career, and she understood the challenges that ground forces faced there. She knew that soldiers like Marcus had done the hardest job in the most dangerous places with very little support or recognition. Marcus was quiet for a long time before he started talking about the day he earned his Silver Star. He said it was a Thursday morning in September and his squad had been sent to investigate reports of Taliban fighters in a village called Spin Boldak. Intelligence suggested the enemy was using the village marketplace as a meeting point. When they arrived, everything seemed normal. People were buying and selling goods and children were playing in the streets. Marcus said they were preparing to leave when the first bomb exploded near the center of the market. Then more explosions followed and people started screaming and running everywhere. Patricia knew this story was difficult for Marcus to tell. She had heard similar accounts from other combat veterans over the years. She told him he could stop any time, but Marcus shook his head and said he wanted to continue. He said it felt good to finally tell someone who understood what war was really like. Marcus explained that the explosions had been coordinated Taliban attacks designed to kill as many civilians as possible. The enemy fighters were positioned around the marketplace with automatic weapons and rocket launchers. They were shooting at anyone who tried to escape, including women and children. His squad was pinned down behind a concrete wall, but Marcus could see people trapped in the middle of the marketplace. There was an old man who had been knocked down by the first explosion and could not get up. 3 small children were crying next to their injured mother. Several other civilians were wounded and unable to move to safety. Marcus told Patricia that he knew he had to do something. His squad leader was calling for air support and backup, but that would take time they did not have. The Taliban fighters were moving closer, and the trapped civilians would be killed if someone did not help them right away. So Marcus left the safety of the wall and ran into the open marketplace. Enemy bullets were hitting the ground all around him, but he kept moving toward the trapped people. He reached the old man first and dragged him behind a vendor stall that provided some cover from the gunfire. Then he went back for the children and their mother. The woman had been hit by shrapnel and was bleeding badly, but she was still conscious. Marcus carried the smallest child while helping the other 2 run to safety. He made 3 more trips to get the wounded mother and other injured civilians. Patricia felt her throat getting tight as she listened to Marcus describe what he had done that day. She had read many Silver Star citations, but hearing the story directly from the hero himself was different. She could see the pain in his eyes as he remembered friends he had lost and people he had not been able to save. Marcus continued his story and told Patricia about the Taliban fighters who had surrounded the marketplace. While he was helping civilians, his squad was engaged in a fierce gun battle with at least 20 enemy fighters. The Americans were outnumbered and running low on ammunition. After getting the last civilian to safety, Marcus took up a defensive position and helped his squad fight off the attackers. He used his rifle and grenades to hold off Taliban fighters for almost 2 hours until reinforcements finally arrived. By then, several of his fellow soldiers had been wounded and they were almost out of bullets. The final part of the story was the hardest for Marcus to tell. During the battle, a Taliban rocket had exploded near his position and sent metal fragments into his left leg. He had continued fighting even while losing blood until the enemy fighters were finally driven away or killed. Patricia asked Marcus how many people he had saved that day. He thought about it for a moment and said 14 civilians, including the 3 children and several elderly people who could not run fast enough to escape on their own. He said he wished he could have saved more, but that was all he could do. She told Marcus that what he had done was extraordinary and that most people would never have the courage to risk their lives for strangers the way he had. She said that earning a Silver Star meant he was one of the bravest soldiers in the entire military and that his actions had made a real difference in the world. Marcus looked uncomfortable with the praise. He said he had just done what any soldier would do in that situation. He said the real heroes were the guys in his squad who did not make it home and that he still felt guilty about surviving when better men had died. Patricia understood this feeling because she had met many combat veterans who struggled with survivor guilt. She told Marcus that his friends who had died would want him to live a good life and accept recognition for his service. She said that honoring his sacrifice was a way of honoring their memory too. As the plane began its descent into Atlanta, Patricia gave Marcus her business card. She told him about organizations that helped veterans transition back to civilian life and find good jobs that matched their skills. She said there were people who wanted to help him succeed if he was willing to accept assistance. Marcus looked at the card and thanked her for everything she had done on the flight. He said he had been feeling lost since leaving the military, but talking to her had helped him remember that his service had meant something important. He said maybe it was time to stop hiding from his past and start building a better future. When they landed, several passengers came up to thank Marcus for his service. A businessman gave him his card and offered him a job interview. A family with young children thanked him for protecting people like their kids. An elderly woman hugged him and said her late husband had been a veteran too. Patricia watched as Marcus handled the attention with dignity and grace. She could see that something had changed in him during their conversation. He was standing straighter and looking people in the eye when they spoke to him. He was beginning to accept that his service deserved recognition and respect. As they walked through the terminal together, Patricia felt proud of what had happened on the flight. Sometimes standing up for what was right made all the difference in someone's life. Sometimes it just took one person caring enough to act when others would not. Marcus Rodriguez was no longer hiding from his past. He was ready to face his future as the hero he had always been.